Scottish-born Richard Curl would grow up to be a famous traveler who penned numerous books about his various adventures. As a child, he had an encounter that continued to baffle and frighten him well into adulthood, and of which he documented in his book, Caravanserai and Conversation. In this video, I will discuss the Richard Curl Foxman incident. It was 1937. Curl was sleeping alone in an isolated room on the second floor of his family's house in Scotland. At around 2 a.m., he found himself waking up for no apparent reason. He remained in his warm bed, watching as light snow fell just outside the large window situated across the room. Just then he heard footsteps. The steps were steady and unhurried and approached the back of the house. They were fairly quiet, but the night was very still. Something about the sound made him nervous. The steps came to the back courtyard of the house, where there was a gate that was bolted every night. Yet the steps continued unhindered, now sounding steady and unhurried, padding first along the lower passage, then up the back staircase of the house. The steps continued quietly, evenly approaching, until they stopped just outside his bedroom door. Curl, now sitting up in bed, staring at the door, found himself overcome with fear. Then the handle turned and the door opened. Framed in the doorway, in the low light of the night, was a figure with the face of a fox, but it was standing up on two legs and appeared to be wearing clothing. It had a top hat on its head. Curl could see a bushy tail behind the figure, swaying back and forth. Though it seemed larger than a normal fox would be, Curl had no doubt that it was absolutely a fox of some sort, though it did not present the rank odor that Curl had come to associate with foxes in general. The fox gazed directly at Curl, but not with a malign expression. Curl shouted, "Go away!" And the strange being did, turning away and walking back the way it came, its steady and unhurried steps heard clearly by Curl as it took the exact same path out of the house and across the yard, its feet crunching in the snow, until they finally became inaudible as they reached a road leading off to the nearby woods. I have to wonder if this was a sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucination type thing. Because the witness was in bed, that's what makes me believe it might have been. But he claims he was alert, he was awake and alert, and he could hear this thing, walking, making his way to the door, to his bedroom door, where it opened it. They stared at each other. He reacted to it, he screamed at it. The entity reacted to him, and it took off, and he could hear it running away. And he claims he was awake and alert the whole time. So, was it? I don't know. I know that I've covered similar type cases in the past where people claim to have seen entities wearing top hats, frogs and such. So, I don't know. In April 2016, UFO researcher Malcolm Robinson was introduced to a woman named Brenda, who recounted how, as a young girl, between 1966 and 1972, she had numerous encounters with a being that she described as part man, part penguin. At that time, she was living in Mir, which was a district within Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She also had a vague memory of something occurring at her parents' holiday home at Septuba, a coastal town to the west of Rio. At the time, she recalled that she was being visited by a strange little being who would come into her room at night. This being was small in stature and had big black eyes, but not like the often reported grays of UFO lore. The being had a little mouth, long arms, and some sort of black triangle-type peak on its forehead. Looking back, Brenda wondered if the peak was hair. She recalled that, to her, this being looked like a penguin. Despite its odd appearance and the fact that it would appear in her room unannounced, Brenda could not recall ever being taken out of her room by this creature, only that she would wake up or come to, sitting in the hallway next to her bedroom. She would watch as the strange creature would leave via the kitchen door out into the enclosed courtyards. Her bedroom was on the ground floor. Brenda also had a vague memory of waking up, lying on a table with two beings and three short beings moving around her, apparently examining her. But she was unsure if this memory was a dream or a real experience. One of the more noticeable things about these experiences was the bright light that introduced the arrival of this penguin, and the lack of any external noise when this was happening. Robinson noted that one of the aspects which was consistent with other UFO abduction stories was that Brenda could communicate without talking. Some form of telepathy was being used, which as a young child she found surprising. She was never afraid in its presence, even having fond memories of it, describing it as warm and caring, though Brenda admits it may have been manipulating her emotions. She also described seeing a small rectangular machine, which looked stainless steel in appearance. This device gave off a metallic sound. Robinson noted that a similar device was described by witnesses in the A-70 abduction case, one of Scotland's most famous UFO encounter cases. In 2017, Lon Strickler of the Phantoms and Monsters blog received an email from a woman named Jane L. describing a chilling encounter she had with a strange winged entity on March 17, 2017, near her home. I am a widow and moved to this house last September 2016 from Ohio. I live with my daughter. Not long after we moved in, we began to hear loud flapping sounds coming from the river across the road from my property. The sounds would usually occur at night. We also saw bright orange lights through the trees near the river. One afternoon I walked across the road and looked around, but I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. The sounds and the lights continued all winter. In fact, one evening while it was snowing, the flapping sounds were very loud. I watched from my living room window as a bright orange light quickly moved upstream, then downstream above the river. On the evening of Friday, March 17, Jane claims she was sitting on her front porch when she heard a loud squawk come from the direction of the river. I looked that way and saw a huge bird-like something above the trees. It was early evening, but it was silhouetted against the sky. It looked like it stopped in mid-flight, stretched its wings, and hovered in mid-air. It had bright orange lights or eyes and seemed to stare and radiate at me. It was terrifying and menacing. I ran into the house and called for my daughter, who was in the basement. We looked out the window, but it was gone. We haven't heard any sounds or seen any lights in the 2 weeks since my sighting. Speaking to Lon, she claimed the creature she saw resembled a huge, almost human-sized wasp. It had a thin body which tapered, and the wings, which there were only 2, were solid. She estimated that the wingspan was 10 to 12 feet, and that the body was about 4 feet in length. It was dark in color, and the wings were more rounded and solid as compared to a butterfly or a moth. To Jane, it appeared to hover about like a flying insect. What truly frightened Jane was that as it hovered above the trees, it appeared to look directly at her, which terrified her. After it departed, Jane was left with an intense feeling of dread and fear, and she's afraid that it will return someday.